Hello everyone. So this is the second video and sort of a dry run for a summer camp on game dev I'm doing this summer. Have a week, 5 days, 3 hours each day to get some high schoolers started into game dev. So using the Godot engine, in the first video we set up the project, and it's not a Godot tutorial. I'm trying to generalize it to game dev. I just went with Godot because with the scripting language based on Python, there's a nice easy learning curve for the game logic, and with which will hopefully give us time to get into actually coding the shaders and um, get a whole lot going very quickly. I'm trying to generalize everything using Godot, but I'm trying to generalize it. I will be mentioning Unity and Unreal in these, but with less functionality than Unity, which has less functionality than Unreal, there's less places to get lost in Godot, which will make for a nice learning curve. So in the first video, we set up our project and created some folders to organize stuff, including and put the source folder here. That way we can save our original source files for the models and textures and things right here. Um, yeah, I'm going to try to get a lot into this video very, very quickly and covering the concepts, but we're using Godot and 4.0 and Blender 3.5 is what's going to be used at that summer camp. So we're ready to start making models, and we'll do that in Blender 3.5. All right, so here we are in Blender 3.5. I want to start a new general file and get rid of these things. Could just hit A to select all. But instead of doing that, I always like to hit W a couple times. You'll notice right over here is the selection tool. It's a box, and W will toggle through that. So then it goes to a circle and then a freeform one. So I always like to start off with that and get the selection tool that I find most useful in 3D environments. So if you haven't done modeling before, quick pass at that. The plan for the summer camp has model. We'll get into details on modeling on Wednesday, but on Monday we'll need some stuff to work with. So we'll just grab some models. And what's going on with this is it's kind of like a fancy connect the dots. We have these vertexes, or vertices for the plural, um, vertices floating in space, and then edges connecting those dots. And whenever we form enough edges to enclose a shape, we put a face in there. So vertexes, edges, and faces. And I will switch back and forth between whether I say vertexes or vertices, uh, just depending on which one sounds better in the sentence I'm saying. I've found that over after a couple years of teaching game dev and doing game dev myself. But that's the basic idea. And then we create more vertices, so we could like hit A to select all those and right click and subdivide. And when we do that, this little menu pops up uh, where we get control over the action we just did. That will be very important in a moment. And we could subdivide each face like 12 times. And now we have lots of little vertices and edges and faces that we can just select and move into whatever shape we want them to be in, and spend a lot more time than I'm doing right here real quick, and keep moving the vertices and around, and the edges and faces will follow until we get a new thing. Also extrusion tools, we can select a face. So here's the selection tools: select by vertex, select by edge, or select by face. We can select a couple faces and then hit E and extrude it out, and extrude it again, bring that up maybe and over, and keep adding things, taking things away, moving them around until we get the shape we want. That's the basic idea. But there's a lot of stuff built in here. So instead of using a cube and starting from scratch, which for the quick models the first day, we'll do a quick character, but there's a better way we can do the landscape. So let's do the landscape first. And if you haven't used it before, you'll probably be happy to know that Blender has a landscape button in it. So instead of just adding a cube, we can just add a landscape. So it's not going to be on by default. So first off, you want to come up, make sure you're in object mode. come up to the top left in the edit menu, and under preferences, you'll see a whole bunch of settings you can control. And about halfway down, this one for add-ons. So select add-ons, and then over in this little search bar, search for landscape, and just hit the checkbox, and then that button will be available. And while we're here, we probably want to put something on our landscape. So also search for sapling, and that is a button to insert trees instead of trying to draw a tree ourselves. So those two buttons will give us really quick landscapes and shrubbery around the landscapes. So you want to turn those on, and yeah, just hit the checkbox and then close out of here. And now when you go to the add button, under mesh, there's a landscape button, and under curve, there's a tree button, a sapling button, sapling tree generator. So let's do the landscape first. So under mesh, go to landscape, and it starts off really small. If I grab the little measuring tool, you can see it's about 2 meters. Doing that, got rid of that little menu though. And that menu is important because once we once we create it, we can do all sorts of adjustments. And once we accept those adjustments, we're kind of stuck with it. So I'm going to delete this first one. And once again, I'll switch back to the selection tool. I'll come back to add a mesh, add a landscape, and we need to do all of those adjustments first. So if that's collapsed when you first do it, you'll see it down here in the lower left. Expand that menu. You'll see there's a whole bunch of presets, so you can set up cliffs and so flat stones, mountain ranges, rivers, all sorts of presets to start with. I'll just use this one. How many subdivisions? That's how many. Well, we just saw the subdivide button a moment ago. How many times do we split this plane up to make the vertexes and edges and faces? How big is it overall? We will adjust that later. So depending on the detail you can probably increase this. You want to play around with stuff. And the big ones to adjust are down here. So what it is a random pattern that's just laid on the plane as a height map. So if we change the random pattern, we get lots of different things. You see it changing there. I'll just move to some random number. That's probably a good start. And then offset cycles our random pattern around till we find a spot we like. Move it in the X and the Y direction. That's probably good. One of the shaders I'm going to cover is water, so I'm looking for a little indented spot like this to turn into a lake or something. You can stretch it. You'll want to play around with these things, try different things, stretch it in different directions. The depth is how high up it comes or how low it goes. Just kind of find a good number, try different things. Linearity, linearity, you can see is like smoothing and roughing up the hills. Maybe my little divot spot that I was going to use for a lake seems to have disappeared. There's still kind of something there. Offset, move it around and stuff. A height map of how tall or low those are. So I'll just do some shallow hills. Offset that height. I'm going to lower it a little so that that divot it falls below the level plane. Maybe lower it a little bit more. Well, I'll figure something out to go do with it. Minimum. You want to play around with these numbers. Find, whoops. Change that to 1 and that to -1. And maybe a little, whoop, something like that. And offset this. There we go. I think that, yeah, that dropped down a little spot where we can put a water later. some nice little hills. That'll work for now. Play around with these things, find good things, and once you get it set, then click anywhere to apply those settings. But you'll notice it's really small, so we're probably gonna make this bigger. I'll grab the measuring tool and see by default it's about a 2 by 2 meter square, so I'm going to stretch that out with the scale option. So 2 by 2 meters, and a good landscape probably be about half a kilometer wide maybe. So to turn 2 meters into 500 meters, need to get 250 times bigger in the X direction. Maybe I'll do half of that in the Y direction. We lost all our height, so multiply this by some number to bring that back up. And there's a nice huge landscape to begin working with. And I like to see colors whenever I'm doing things. So while we're here in Blender, over here on the right, if you scroll down to this circle thing, this is the material button. You hover over it when the words material properties pop up. We can add a new material. If you haven't done 3D before, with 3D, we need more than just the color. We have to say how the light reflects off of it. Is it metallic? Is it a very rough surface, a smooth surface? It needs all that lighting information, but that's where our color is. And I'm going to override the material over in the game engine, and I do that same thing in every game engine. So using Godot in these videos, but same thing for Unity and Unreal. I'll create the mesh here and then just apply a generic material. This is land, so I'll make it sort of green. Up here in the top right, you'll see a similar looking icon. That's to view the materials. One all the way at the right is the render, but if you don't have any lights or anything, it's kind of hard to see that. But that gives us a landscape with some green material. We will improve the material, considerably improve it later, but it gives us a starting point for it. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. File, save, and remember when we created that project, called it video, created this source folder that has a file in it called .gdignore, so that all the metadata for the Godot engine doesn't have to worry about our image source files, or our model source files. And I'll call this landscape. Save the Blender file. And before we bring this in, I want to also go ahead and throw some trees on here so that we have a nice spot to walk around in. And also, real quick, before adding the trees, I want to check to make sure a nice little lake or something showed up. So I'm going to insert a plane and try to make it about the same size. So 500. Oh, probably don't need that much. Maybe 100. 100. That'll be big enough. And if we move that over to the area where the lake is, it looks like there'll be a little sunken in spot. Scale that up a little. And move it down. Oh, not that far down. Yeah, so there's a nice little sunken spot that'll make for a nice little lake in the landscape when we get over there, but I'm going to do that part in the game engine. It's one of the shaders I have planned for coding. A water shader is a nice quick one to code up. So we need to add some trees to this landscape, but it looks like this video is coming on 14 minutes, so that's probably long enough for this. And quickly introduce the landscape button in Blender 3.5, so mesh, or go to edit, preferences, click the checkbox for landscape, and then under the add button, you will have this button for a landscape. And when you add it in, there's a whole bunch of options. Start playing around with those, deleting them. And then after you accept those, when you're done, accept those options. And let's see, before we finish up, I'm going to just call this landscape, because having a good name on this mesh, the name will come in when we bring it to the engine. And I want to put some trees on here before we do that, but it looks like it's been 15 minutes on landscape. Play around with that, see what kind of landscapes you can make, and then in the next video we will add some trees to this uh, to give us our character a place to walk around. I will see you in the next video.